Hello, folks. Welcome to my channel, Rico's Paradigm. Today, I want to talk about the miseducation of the Filipino. The reason I choose this topic is because I noticed some parallels within the community of the Philippines. I've read a book by Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. The equivalence is uncanny. The term, the miseducation of the Filipino, describes how colonial powers, especially the United States, systematically manipulated the Philippine educational system to suit their own objectives, distorting Filipinos' perceptions of their own history, culture, and identity. A Filipino nationalist historian named Renato Constantino wrote one of the most important essays on the subject titled The Miseducation of the Filipino. In it, he criticizes the colonial educational system for conditioning Filipinos to be subservient to foreign powers instead of cultivating a genuine sense of national identity and independence. Number one, historical context. Understanding the historical background of this phenomenon is essential before diving into the specific miseducation of the Filipino people. Spain colonized the Philippines for over 3 centuries, from 1521 to 1898. Only a small portion of the populace, mainly the elites or ilustrados, had access to formal education during this time because education was largely controlled by Spanish friars. Spanish was the medium of instruction, and the main objectives of education were to uphold the colonial social order and spread Catholicism. Through the Treaty of Paris, the Philippines became a colony of the United States in 1898 following the Spanish American War. In order to introduce American values, language, and governance structures, the United States started implementing a new educational system. Constantino and other nationalists contend that this system was intended to solidify colonial rule and establish a class of Filipinos who were devoted to American interests, despite the Americans' promotion of it as a noble attempt to improve the lot of the Filipino people. Number two, language and cultural alienation. The use of English as the main language of instruction in schools was one of the main factors contributing to the Filipino people's miseducation. English imposition caused Filipinos to become estranged from their native tongues, which further separated them from their own identity, culture, and history. Speaking English was seen as a sign of civilization and progress, and people who couldn't use it were frequently thought to be uneducated or backward. The masses, many of whom felt more at ease speaking their native tongues, became separated from the English speaking elite as a result. The American colonial government successfully separated Filipinos from their pre colonial roots, traditions, and customs by requiring them to learn in English. The United States was positioned as the pinnacle of democracy, advancement, and civilization through the curriculum's emphasis on American literature, history, and values. In the meantime, if Filipino history was taught at all, it was from the colonizers' point of view. A sense of inferiority was also deeply embedded in the Filipino psyche, further undermining Filipino identity. Number three, colonial mentality and subordination. The Americans instilled in the Filipino people a colonial mindset through education. This is a mindset that was instilled in Filipinos who were taught to see American culture as superior and themselves as inferior to their colonizers. As a result, a generation of Filipinos was raised to be obedient, decent American citizens. The colonial educational system placed more emphasis on the virtues of obedience, docility, and imitation than it did on fostering a sense of national pride or stimulating critical thinking about their nation's place in the world. Constantino maintained that Filipinos were conditioned to support American political and economic interests by the American style educational system. For instance, subjects like science, technology, and agriculture that would have enabled Filipinos to advance their nation were not given priority in the curriculum. Rather, it concentrated on creating white collar workers who could work for American owned companies or assist in running the colonial government. In this way, education turned into a means of guaranteeing the Philippines' continued political and economic reliance on the US. Number four, the Estrado class function. The role that the Estrado class or Filipino elite plays in the miseducation of Filipinos is another factor. Originally leading the struggle for independence during the Philippine Revolution against Spain in 1896, this group had received their education under the Spanish educational system. In order to maintain their social and economic standing, many Estrados, however, sided with the new colonial government when the United States took control. These elites adopted and profited from the American educational system, frequently sending their kids to study in the US or joining the colonial government. The El Estrado class thus became complicit in the ongoing oppression of the Filipino people. They became agents of colonialism, advancing American values and interests instead of utilizing their education and privilege to advance national unity and self determination. Due to their continued enslavement as peasants or laborers and their significant exclusion from the advantages of education, this further widened the gap between the elite and the general populace. Number five, the impact of nationalism. The growth of Filipino nationalism was significantly impacted by the Filipino people's miseducation. The American educational system produced a narrative that portrayed the United States as the country's liberator from Spanish oppression by deleting or misrepresenting the history of Filipino resistance to colonialism. The narrative focused on the positive effects of American colonialism, downplaying the role of Filipino revolutionaries like Andres Bonifacio and Katipunan. By doing this, the system concealed the fact that the United States had rejected the Filipinos' 1898 Declaration of Independence from Spain. Filipinos found it difficult to imagine a future free from foreign rule as a result of this version of the history, which also damaged their sense of pride in their country because it hindered the development of a true nationalist consciousness. Constantino contended that this historical distortion was one of the most harmful elements of the Filipino people's miseducation. Instead, despite American policies that maintained the Philippines' economic and political independence, they were taught to view the US as their protector and benefactor. Number six, the long term repercussions. In the Philippines, the consequences of Filipinos' poor education are still evident today. Social and economic divisions are still being exacerbated by the preference for English over Filipino or other native languages in the workplace and in schools. Because of the colonial mindset that the American educational system ingrained in them, many Filipinos continue to regard Western culture and values as superior to their own. Furthermore, the Philippines' continuous economic difficulties have been exacerbated by the emphasis on creating laborers for a service based economy rather than growing the nation's industrial and agricultural sectors. It is possible to interpret the nation's dependence on foreign labor, especially in occupations like nursing and housekeeping, as a continuation of the colonial trend of preparing Filipinos to meet the demands of more developed nations rather than advancing their own economy. In summary, a purposeful and methodical process known as the miseducation of the Filipino allows colonial powers, especially the United States, to solidify their control and authority over the Philippines through the use of education. The colonial education system alienated Filipinos from their own culture, created a sense of inferiority, and hindered the emergence of a true nationalist consciousness by forcing English as a language of instruction, misrepresenting Filipino history, and endorsing American values. As the Philippines continue to struggle with issues of identity, dependency, and inequality, the long term effects of this miseducation are still evident today. For Filipinos to recover their sense of identity and strive toward true independence and national development, it is imperative that they comprehend this history. All right, folks, that is all for today's show. Thank you all for watching, and I hope someone learned something from this history. Until next time, have a good day.